There I was, sitting in terror looking down a void hallway, terrified out of my mind. I slowly started to step back like I was trying not to disturb a sleeping beast, and I started to walk faster till I broke out in an all-out sprint. Walking down the hallway, covered in sweat, my breathing rapid, the hallway seemed to go on forever. Then I stopped and realized the quietness. It was like nothing had ever happened. The only sound was my breathing and the same water dripping as it was before. All was the same as it was before. I slowly slid to the floor and sat there accepting my fate. An hour passed, then another. Though it felt like days, I was down there with my head in my hands waiting to die. Finally, I got up and walked some more until finally I saw light. The light from the opening in the roof. I walked right back into the room where it all started, with the dead bodies and blood everywhere. My stomach felt like it was turning inside out, so I walked over to the food supply cabinet. There was nothing there. I thought I was going to starve down there, but I saw a can of beans on the ground. I rushed over to the can and picked it up. It was empty like everything else. I threw it down the hallway. Then I heard it again, the growling from that monster in the darkness. Slowly a hand reached out from the darkness. I sat there in horror. It grabbed the can that rolled down the hallway and attacked it, then stopped suddenly as if realizing it was not living. I crawled on the floor over to the shelves that I had already searched, realizing I had seen a flashlight in the cabinets. I grabbed the flashlight and turned it on, but nothing happened. I smacked it around a little and it flickered to life. I aimed it down the hallway and saw something pass around the corner for a split second. It had pale white skin, and it was hunched over with its vertebrae visible from its back like spikes. I walked down the hall, now able to see. I almost threw up. All the walls were covered in blood. There were shreds of skin scattered everywhere, and there were dismembered limbs making a trail down the hall. I turned the corner of the hall. The space opened up into a big room. I shined my light around, scanning the room. I walked toward the middle of the room and felt a splash on my pants. I looked down. I was standing in some bubbly, sticky liquid. It took me a moment to process what was happening when I heard a thump behind me. There was a tall humanoid thing with a lanky structure, skin clinging to the bone, pale white skin like marble, and no eyes. The thing slowly edged towards me, twitching and lashing out uncontrollably every few seconds, almost like it was a puppet being thrown around by a 5-year-old, until it was a hair from my face, and it bared its rows upon rows of teeth as it growled. Then its head cocked slightly. I heard a soft squeaking like a mouse. The thing started roaring and it bounded off into the darkness. Suddenly there was a horrible squelch and the squeaking stopped. I slowly inched my way out of the room, biting my tongue to keep myself from falling to the floor and laying there until I died, sobbing and starving. Then an inch away from getting around the corner and back to safety, my flashlight's bulb popped. I heard a thunderous roar. The ground shook underneath me as the thing barreled straight towards me. I tried to run away, but I wasn't fast enough. Within a moment, the thing was on top of me, its hands on my throat. I lashed out, trying to break free from its grip as everything slowly faded to black. In one last desperate attempt, I lashed out with my hands and slammed it into one of the thing's empty eye sockets. It roared in pain and fell back. I jumped to my feet and barreled down the hallway, and the thing came after me. I heard the ground thundering under my feet, the thing gaining on me. I felt its huge hand fly inches away from the back of my head, searing hot pain stretching down my back. I dived into the main room, sunlight streaming in from the hole. The monster roared and I heard its thunderous footsteps retreating as I gasped for air. I didn't know what that thing was. I forgot where I was for a moment, staring up at the sunlight, wishing I was back there with Soul, playing in the forest before this nightmare. I had to find a way out and see my parents again. I saw a mouse scurry across the floor, looking up at me, studying me, before running into his little hole in the wall. I wish I was like that mouse, safety always a few feet away from me. But why didn't that mouse that saved me from that thing run to safety? Why was that thing attracted to the mouse and not me? It doesn't have any eyes. It can only hear. I was so proud of myself at this discovery that I started giggling hysterically. only to be met with growling in the distance, would shut me up fast. As I thought about this discovery, I scanned the blood-soaked room, trying to find any tool to use. Then I saw it. A clicker that was used for Morse code messages at the time, now damaged and ripped from its place on the table. "It's not that hard, bro," I said. "I know, just give me a second," said Saul. We were in the forest. Saul was taking forever to climb up a rock ledge, and I was sitting up on top of the ledge looking around. We were boys, climbing through the forest for fun, as boys do. Saul finally got up the ledge and we continued our exploration. It was hard to see through the dense trees, but we managed. A few hours had passed of us trekking through the forest. It was sunset now. "We have to start going home," I said. "Thank God. This is so tiring," said Saul. There was a small clearing in front of us with the moon shining down, making a glow, like the type of glow you see in those stupid romantic movies. I walked into the clearing with Saul on my heels. I heard a quick gasp and turned around. Saul was nowhere to be seen. "Saul!" I yelled. I traced my steps back, scanning the tree line for Saul. Then suddenly, the ground disappeared from under my feet and my head slammed into something metal. Saul was shaking me. John, wake up!" Saul yelled at me. My head was aching. I didn't know what had happened. I looked around. Saul was over me, looking relieved that I was awake. "What happened?" I asked. "Why in the hell are you asking me?" Saul responded. I looked around now that I had come to my senses. There was a deep hole above us. We were in a World War II era bunker of some sort. Everything was rusty and blood. Blood was everywhere. Saul saw my eyes widen and turned to take in his surroundings as well. "What the hell?" Saul said under his breath. There were skeletons, but these skeletons were torn to pieces. It was so gruesome. A skull was caved in, a person's chest was ripped open, and so many other horrid things that I don't dare to remember. I got up and stumbled a little bit. Saul and I were huddled close together as we were trying to avoid the bodies. Now that I look back on it, we probably should have been more scared, but I think we might have just been in shock. We stumbled down the hallway without even communicating. We both knew there was no other way out. In the distance, there were tiny drops of water, like a leaky tap echoing down the hallway, and I flinched every time it hit the ground. In the hallway we were walking down, there was even more carnage. There were blood trails, like something dragged the bodies down the hallway. We stopped for a few seconds and sat down. "Are we going to ignore all the bodies and blood?" Saul whispered. "Yes, that's exactly what we're going to do," I said. That's when we heard it, a deep growl echoing down the hallway. Saul looked at me, his eyes wide with fright. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I didn't answer him. I wish I did, because that growl, that deep, horrible growl, was the last thing he ever heard. From the darkness down the hallway, a huge hand about the size of Saul's face emerged from the darkness. I didn't have time to say anything. It grabbed Saul by the chest, and I heard a horrible crunch of his ribs being crushed. Saul screamed a horrible shriek as the thing pulled him into pitch blackness, and he kept screaming, and I had to listen to him as the thing ripped him to shreds. I was helpless, just staring into darkness, listening to my best friend wailing as the thing from the darkness finished him off. This story is a retelling of something that happened to me when I was 7 years old. As the years have gone by and I've grown up, I've realized the story cannot possibly be true, yet I cannot shake the feeling that it is. It happened in Tokyo in the subway station. I was standing with my father when I saw the demon, a monstrously tall, furry creature with leathery black wings and a snout like an anteater. I must have stared at him for close to 10 minutes before he finally spoke, in a soft mutter that was clearly intended for his ears only. "This human is creeping me out," he said. "It almost looks like it's looking right at me." "I am looking right at you," I said. The demon nearly jumped out of his skin. "You can see me?" he asked. "Yes, can't everybody?" "Not unless you're in the fifth dimension." "Am I in the fifth dimension?" I asked. Your mind must have slipped here by mistake. What were you thinking before you saw me? I thought for a moment and then grinned. Trains? Oh, well, trains are the link between our dimensions. Guess your mind must have just wandered over here. Either that or you're going crazy. I hope I'm not going crazy, I said. Being crazy is a good thing in the fifth dimension, the demon replied. I laughed. Do you have subway lines in the fifth dimension? I asked. Of course, he said. How else do we get to work? You've got wings, I said. Yes, but who wants to fly? Taking the train is so much faster, and if I fly to work, I'm all sweaty when I get there. So what do you use your wings for? I asked. I put them over my head when it rains. Can I see? I asked. Sure, the demon said. My hair blew back as he swooped his enormous wings over my head. I laughed again. You're funny, I said. The demon laughed too, but his expression changed. Are you okay? I asked. You seem sad. Yes, the demon replied, not looking at me but at something behind me. Say, would you like to see a magic trick? Okay. The demon reached up and tugged a big rainbow handkerchief out of his snout. He must have pulled out 20 feet before he ran out. That's funny, I laughed. But I stopped when I realized I wasn't holding my dad's hand anymore. I looked around and saw the subway station had disappeared, replaced by flowing green meadows that were full of old trains. I can't see the subway station anymore, I said. That's okay, said the demon. Sometimes it's better to see what isn't there instead of what is. What do you mean? Sometimes when I'm bored or sad, my mind slips to the third dimension and I see people like you. That's funny, I laughed. Can you go to other dimensions too? But the demon didn't answer. He was looking up at the sky. It's starting to rain, he said, whooshing his wings up over his head. Warm droplets of rain hit my face. Can I get under your wings with you? I asked. Not now, he replied. You got to go home. The world began to shimmer and flow together like different shades of green and gold paint, spinning around faster and faster in circles. I started to feel a little sick, and I closed my eyes. The world stopped spinning, but warm droplets of water still fell on my face. I opened my eyes and saw my mom crying over me, but I didn't see my dad. Where's Dad? I asked her. Did he bring me home? Yes, darling, she said, although she didn't look at me when she said it. He brought you home and then he had to go away. Oh, I replied. When will he be back? I don't know, she said. My dad never came back, and it was years before I found out the truth. He had killed himself that day. That morning, he had written a note to my mother explaining that he intended to bring me along and step in front of the train with me. My mother found it when she got home from work and called the police, but it was too late to stop my father. The witnesses say that just before he jumped, I pulled away from his hand and ran away, fainting right after. But one of the witnesses, a little boy around my age, said that he saw something take my hand and lead me away from the speeding train. He said it was a monstrously tall and furry creature with leather black wings and an anteater's snout. I'll admit, this was a very stupid thing to do. I thought I was being clever. This whole mess started a few years ago when I got the news my boys couldn't swim. My wife and I were heartbroken. We talked about having kids on our first date. She wanted 4. I wanted 2. We compromised and decided to have 4. We tried for our first, but it was taking a while. I told her not to worry, said we should be patient, but time dragged on and on. She made an appointment with a fertility specialist. Turns out, I was the problem. The doctor was great. She explained all our options. I'll avoid the grisly details, but it was easy for me. My grand contribution was filling up a cup, but my wife had to endure all sorts of injections and procedures. Skip ahead 2 years and we've still got no baby, just unpaid bills. We talked about it and agreed to pull the plug. I resigned myself to never becoming a father, until I had a bright idea, that is. I started reading books, the kind of books you wouldn't find in a library. The kind you wouldn't let a pastor catch you reading. Those kind of books. The ritual seemed straightforward enough. Light some candles, utter an incantation, then hash out the deal. My wife was raised Catholic, so I kept it a secret. One evening while she was away, I performed the ritual. The demon had one giant eye, sharp teeth, and a three-piece suit. It spoke in an odd, formal manner. I explained my dilemma. All I wanted was to have a child. Just one was enough. The demon said that wasn't a problem and asked what I had to offer. When I inquired whether demons accepted houses behind on their mortgage payments, it said no. I suggested my second-born child. I asked what happens if I only had one, and it said the deal would be null and void. We shook on it. There was a gust of wind, a moment of complete darkness, then it was gone. I was excited. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, brought some roses, my wife's favorite, and had a romantic dinner ready when she got back. I didn't want to waste any time. A week later, when she was in the mood, we got down to business. Soon she was showing early signs of pregnancy. We picked up a test and jumped for joy when we got the result. Now it was time to put my plan into action and have a vasectomy. The demon couldn't have my second-born child if I never had one. I booked an appointment and thought that was the end of it. Until today. The 12-week ultrasound scan. At first, I was beside myself with excitement. Then it happened. "You see that blob on the left?" said the doctor. "That's the head." My eyes swelled up with tears. Incredible. "And you see that blob on the right?" "I do." "That's the other head." You mean, congratulations, you're having twins." I was 16 and me and my friends, I'll call Evan and Jake, wanted to rent a hotel for the night since it was spring break. We got to the hotel and checked in. It had a really funky smell, but we still stayed there. Once we got to our room, it was about 3 p.m., so we decided to go swimming. The pool was downstairs departed from the hotel. Once we got to the entrance, there was a man at least 6'3", all black with a hood covering his face facing us. I panicked a little, but not out loud. We got into the pool and swam for a few hours until we saw that man again, all black, sitting on the chair by the pool. I cleared my throat. Can I help you, sir?" I asked. No response. I was still a little paranoid. I put my face in the water, and at the bottom of the pool was a figure that was all black. I screamed like a little girl and ran for the door. I looked back and saw nothing, not the guy in the chair or the guy under the pool. My friends thought I was seeing things, but I saw what I saw as clear as water. I didn't feel like swimming anymore, so I decided to get dinner at a nearby restaurant. I got a table for me and my friends to sit at, and there was once again the man all in black on the other side of the dining room and was staring at me. I have had enough. I went over there and I lost track of him and he took off. After that, I decided that this trip has gone too far and we should leave tomorrow morning, but my friends didn't like that idea. Once it was 10:30, I and my friends dozed off in the hotel room. I woke up to some noises. I saw a shadow figure at the end of my bed. I calmed myself down and told myself that it was my hat I put there before I went to bed. I went to bed and got woken up 30 minutes later to more noises. I was getting thirsty, so I reached under the bed and tried to grab my water bottle, but I grabbed something and I was totally shocked by what I grabbed. It was my hat. I was never more scared in my life, but I couldn't help but to scream at the top of my lungs when I heard a voice next to my ear say, "You're a bitch." I jumped out of bed and realized it was two men in black right there, and I tried to fight them, but it was no use once they grabbed me and dragged me out of that room. I tried to scream, but that guy was covering my mouth. I passed out and woke up on a stretcher. It turns out those guys knifed me while I was passed out, and someone caught them. But the doctor said no one could catch them, the guys who got me. To this day, I always have a nightlight at night, so I'm not scared. Last week, I started praying. I felt like I needed to. I clasped my hands together and begged for the wounds to never heal again. I stood in front of the mirror and told myself that the one thing I can't afford to lose is my fear. I fear people. I fear the outside. And obviously, I fear Will. But my biggest fear is forgetting my terror and my agony. Even though it might seem unimaginable right now, I fear that one day my hands will shake a little bit less, and the loneliness will creep back in like a reoccurring cancer. I hope typing my story out will force me to remember. The 20th of May, the day of our meticulously crafted friendship, broke apart. It must have been around 10 p.m. when Will called me. He wanted me to come to the train station. For the first time, maybe ever, I sensed weakness in his shaking voice. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I wonder what would have happened to me if I didn't agree to meet him that day. I guess he would have simply remained a distant memory. The only friend I ever had was a short man who always wore cheap t-shirts and a pair of Ray-Bans he never took off. There was a big scar on his balding head. He looked about 10 years older than a kid from college should have. But don't let his appearance fool you. Everybody, men and women alike, loved him to bits. So did I. He was the only person that ever dared talk to me. I would have mumbled, unaware of the sharp claws hiding behind my back. Instead, I decided to run to the train station. I saw him at platform 4. We sat down and lit our cigarettes, a ritual as integral to our friendship as speaking the same language was. My brother died. I have to go home for a while, he stated. I'm sorry. I'll be fine. Don't worry. I will not be able to see you for a long time, though. I will take the train straight to the airport and stay in Augusta. I watched the tobacco slowly wither away. I knew that there was nothing I could say. Death remains a mystery to those who are spared by its effects. Will looked incredibly sick, even more so than what was to be expected. His skin was pale and brittle, the blood apparently completely sucked out of him. The tiniest gust of wind would have been enough to sweep him off his feet. You look like a corpse. Fuck you, dude, he chuckled. Soon after that, he got on the train and left. We will meet again, he said. To this day, I wonder what prompted me to follow him. It was probably his appearance, his relative lack of grief, and the fact that he never once mentioned having a brother. But most importantly, it was the way his eyes shot up when he smiled at me. For just a second, I saw something heinous light up in him, something that for most of our friendship had remained concealed. Without having the time for thought or contemplation, I stepped onto the train. There were signs, so many of them that they practically begged me to leave. While I saw him mindlessly scrolling on his phone, his melancholic mask replaced by an expression of pure apathy, I could have left. When he surprisingly got up at the very next stop instead of going to the airport, I could have left. And even when he set foot in his squeaky clean apartment, struggling and groaning on the way, trapped in an endless trance like a junkie waiting for his next fix, I could have left. The entrances of innocence only really shut their doors on me after Will entered his study room, after I decided to stay long enough to hear the muffled voices coming out of it. Will, just let me go, bro. I don't care what type of shit you're on. You gotta let me go. A familiar voice pleaded. I recognized him almost immediately. It was Carl, a freshman from our college. I will never forget the fear that overtook me this very moment. For a second, everything went black. I barely managed to pull myself together and break my fall. As carefully as I could muster, I opened the door just enough for me to peek through. The images and memories of that night have been forever imprinted onto me. They have left homogeneous craters on my being. Telling you about them now tears me apart. I guess I have no other choice. I can't allow the pain to fade. A young man was trapped in a chair, his hands tied behind his back. He looked awful, bloodshot eyes covered in sweat, with small cuts and bruises scattered around his arms and legs. Will looked even worse. At this point, his body was caving in on itself. He was wobbling around the room, hunched over, his back appearing unable to hold his weight any longer. A smell of rotten flesh lingered in the air. "You know I can't do that, Carl," Will said. He sounded erratic and confused, forced to slur his words since his lips only moved reluctantly. This body of mine, it stopped working, died like a pair of batteries. So now, it's your turn. Man, what are you even talking about? Please, just let me go." His eyes gleamed with panic as he tried to free himself from his restraints. Will let out a laugh before answering. Suddenly, sounding sharp and rigid, instead of hearing the voice I'd gotten used to, somehow multiple people spoke at once, a choir of people from all walks of life and backgrounds, spitting Carl's weakness. It was overwhelming. Small cracks formed on the wall of the room as thousands of souls united in the body of one. "Yes, of course. You would not understand. I am older than your feeble mind dares to imagine. I have possessed countless human beings, destroyed an infinite number of dreams and hopes. To you, I am a god." Dazed by his hurt, Carl answered, "You're clearly not in the right headspace, man. Free me, and we can forget all about this." Will let out a furious scream. For a second, I thought he would maul his victim to death. With his back turned to me, he stood close enough to bite his prisoner's nose off.
"That's the one thing that's always bothered me about you humans. You're always so ungrateful. You think I enjoyed talking to you. You think I liked hearing you discuss the newest Marvel movies. I did it so you would come here without making a big fuss. Giving me your body is the least you can do."
As he let out a vicious roar, my one and only friend pierced his finger into his victim's skull. His nails, apparently able to cut through skin and bone, created a small opening, fresh blood seeping out of the wound. Carl couldn't even dare to scream. His pupils were filled with the sort of deep desperation you only see once in a lifetime. Seemingly possessed by a horde of demons, he started uncontrollably shaking. His chair fell onto its side. The rope used to hold his hands together ripped apart, unable to withstand the force of his rapid tremors. A layer of blood and spit formed around his mouth. Meanwhile, his captor carefully stepped away and cleaned his hands, enjoying the sick show of his own creation, eyeing this poor fish on land, frantically trying to get back into water. A few more moments of hell passed by me before silence re-entered the room as Carl's body finally gave out and lay motionless on the ground. A last chuckle escaped his abuser's lungs until he too crashed on the ground like a sack of potatoes. Will's forehead slamming onto the hardwood floor, Carl's blood dripping down his face. It was too much for me. The world turned into a senseless stage play, too messy for its native audience to understand. My brain reduced to a computer with a million open tabs, just about to shut down. I don't remember how much time had passed, imprisoned in a state of utter paralysis, rocking myself back and forth, till a voice familiar to a part in my brain that sat miles away calmly addressed me. "What's good, my boy?" Dream became reality, and reality became nightmare. I raised my head to look up from the wooden floor. Roughly 5 feet away from me stood a man I thought would never get up again. It was Carl. Carl in all his glory, lanky and timid with a pair of thick glasses sitting on his nose. Yet I knew it wasn't him. It was Will. Will speaking out of the body he kidnapped and tortured, while standing right beside his old rotting corpse. If his eyes didn't betray him, he would have almost looked indistinguishable. But every 5 seconds or so, His pupils changed color and form, green to blue to black to gray, and sometimes transforming into the wonderful shining brown I came to associate with companionship and brotherhood. He looked over my trembling presence, a small boy kneeling on the ground, unable to force his mouth to form a scream. You know, you were initially supposed to be my next vessel. A few months ago, I changed my mind. I wanted to keep you for a little bit longer. I came to quite enjoy your presence. Will winked at me. Now that you've gone and seen me, I guess I have no other choice. People often say you experience an amount of calmness right before you die. There was no such thing for me. Death looked me right in my eyes, and I couldn't look away. As the devil came closer to me, I felt like a sick antelope waiting to be devoured by a rabid lion. Standing only inches apart from me, he bent down and met my gaze. I want you to know that I'm going to kill you now. I let out a scream of pure angst, high and shrill, in a way I thought was impossible for me. Scrambling to my feet, I rushed towards him. I was possessed, controlled by fear and a deep sense of betrayal. Effortlessly, Will dodged my wild haymakers, mocking me while casually waving and ducking. You know why I always choose people like you, the ugly, lonely, and desperate. It's because if I took over the rest, people would get suspicious. Yes, I can pretend and play my part, but they can sense the change. I choose you because nobody would care. Nobody would be there to notice you had been replaced. My arms were heavy. My shoulders were about to give out. I had never felt such hopelessness before. If you hadn't followed me, you could have lived for a few months longer. I would have given you my last goodbyes and then switched bodies. Maybe I would have even considered befriending you again. Sadly, it seems you are destined to die. In an explosion of rage, I picked up the old chair Carl was previously trapped in. A look of genuine surprise on his face, I smashed the timber against the demon's head. The chair instantly splintered into 1,000 pieces. A loud bang rang out in my ears, while a cloud of debris and dust lingered in the air. For a second, Will seemed confused and disoriented. With his jaw opened wide, he stared at me in disbelief. I couldn't move anymore. This was all I could muster. Upon realizing just how minuscule the extent of my power was, the beast's face morphed into a horrible grimace, the corners of his mouth wide enough to almost touch his nose. Men and women of all different ages and derelicts simultaneously burst into a laughing fit.
This is it. This is your grandiose strategy. You tried to defeat me with furniture?
Tears of hubris streamed down Will's face, his endless cackling full of pride and egotism. I put my hands on my knees, anxiously trying to catch my breath. I looked up at him the same way a mountain climber examines the deep abyss. With a smug smile plastered on him, he put his hand on my shoulder. I guess I ought to put you out of your misery. Before even being able to process his sentence, he pounced and rang me to the ground. Despite his cuts and injuries, his strength was far beyond anything I thought was possible. I only managed to hold onto his wrist for a few seconds until he freed himself and crashed his fist towards my jaw. The blast launched me into another dimension. Multiple teeth fell out of my mouth and landed next to me. The taste of iron covered my tongue. Will, now standing over my dazed self and surrounded by glittering stars, buried his sneakers into my stomach. A last defeated yowl. The world was hazy, every wave of pain overwritten by a new one, as he continued his brutal onslaught. When Will finally stepped away, his face was colored in a pulsing red, a raging vein bulging out of his forehead. He let out a satisfying sign before leaning down to slit the top of my head. He needed some form of an entry point, I guess. A place for his soul to take over mine. In retrospect, it's funny how in these minutes of undescribable agony, my body unable to move, not enough strength left to try and scream my suffering away, I wanted nothing more than to live. If only to prolong my journey for a little bit longer, I started whispering, I know our friendship probably meant nothing to you, but to me, it meant everything. His nail cutting at my skin suddenly stopped. Thank you for keeping up with me. If you had abandoned me, the solitude would have destroyed everything I had. I would have just floated away into space, nobody left to bat an eye. The words practically flowed out of me. I knew what the monster wanted. Assurance, gratitude, and praise. My speech continued while I searched for that one magical weapon that could somehow save me from certain death. I was now so weak that Will had to press his ears against my face to keep listening, a starving dog licking up every single one of my compliments. You have given each and every one of your victims a wonderful present, a gift I would have previously laughed and sneered at, but perhaps the only gift that makes life worth living. As quietly as I possibly could, I reached for the broken chair leg lying next to me. Oh, the relief I felt when its sharp edges rubbed against my palm. What I realized after meeting you is that all my time spent alone, I was slowly killing myself. Take me if you wish. Is there really any difference between death and solitude? Inch by inch, I lifted up the stake and pointed it towards the monster's liver. He was still silently enjoying my declaration. This was all he had ever dreamed of. Every muscle in my arm was burning. Fear can't even begin to describe my turmoil of emotions. I knew that in about 5 seconds, everything would be over, no matter the outcome. You have given me everything, and now I shall return the favor. His face first formed into a proud smile, then distorted into a grimace of utter shock as the sharp side of the stick stuck into his torso. The melody of tearing flesh blended with his violent screams. Blood oozed out of his wound, tainting the timber still stuck in his abdomen. Will bolted to his feet and ripped the chair leg out of him. Never in my life have I seen this much blood. It shot out of him like a relentless waterfall. The hurt blinded him, turned him into nothing more than an uncontrollable raging animal. The demon's eyes now transformed at a rapid rate, green to blue to black to gray, until for a short moment they were burning red. Fierce enough to by sight alone raise the temperature of the room. His voice became horribly distorted and metallic. His words were accompanied by an unbearable screeching. Even if all my prayers one day fail, I'm sure these memories will never lose their echo. The second I touch my door handle, forced to flee the dark aloneness, his voice will ring and hopefully make me hesitate just long enough for rationality to take over.
Oh, you fucker! Now you've done it! I will scale you alive, you piece of shit!
The panic once again fueled my body's last resources. While Will still winced in pain, I rushed out the door, ignoring every aching nerve and fiber. As I collapsed onto the pavement, the faint calls of concerned strangers sounded like the singing of angels to me. 2 days later, I told the police my story. They found Will's old corpse, stuck investigating a case I know is far beyond them. I have yet dared to step outside. Every time I even so much as approach my entryway, the fear pulls me back like a stretched rubber band. My terror is still strong enough to keep me safe. But I know that sooner or later the pain will pass. The suffocating loneliness will once again push me out of my apartment. Who knows what terrors will be waiting for me then? He could have taken over anybody he wanted to. He could be my cashier, nurse, or neighbor. He could, at this very moment, lurk in the shadows I cannot see. This is why I pray. Pray that the wonders of togetherness don't tempt me into the world of uncertainty again. Please, God, make my fear eternal.